Alexander paused briefly at the ancient city of Taxila on the Grand Trunk Road. Here a Greek city grew up, the first in the subcontinent. A city of neat lines, a place of colonists, set apart from the hubbub of the native town next door. For centuries after, Greek was spoken in these streets just as English is now. In the bazaars you can still find the coins of Alexander's successors, Greek Maharajas lording it in a Greek Raj.
Ah, this is Greek. Yes, Eucratides the Great. Where did the coin come from? Does he know?
And on their coins the heirs of Alexander proudly sport the cavalry hat and scarf of Alexander's crack units, with all the swagger of fighter aces, the viciously valiant Greeks as the Indians called them. So began the meeting of two of the great civilizations in history. Alexander too was shown with the headdress of elephant hide, conqueror of India. That was his ambition now. He marched on south, towards the Great Salt Range. Long before the Grand Trunk Road, this was the ancient route into India. When you come over the Great Salt Range, suddenly a wonderful view opens up. The Jhelum River, the first of the 5 great rivers of the Punjab, and beyond the plains of India stretching away as far as the Ganges itself, the heartland of Indian civilization. For the Greek troops and their leadership, it must have been an extraordinary moment after all the thousands of miles that they'd travelled. And from now on, they'd be marching into the unknown. Across the Jhelum, the local Indian Raja, Porus, had massed a powerful army with 200 war elephants. He was determined to stop Alexander crossing. Somehow, Alexander had to get his forces over in secret. The Greeks said he did it where a spur of the Salt Range comes down to the river plain to form a headland. I went looking for it at the little village of Jalalpur. And there, I met the general.
General Shafkat.
How are
Michael
you?
Wood.
Nice to meet you, sir.
Very nice to meet you. And what a wonderful place this is.
General Shafkat's family owns the shrine here. A veteran of latter-day campaigns, he'd lectured on Alexander at Staff College, and he'd got it all worked out.
Where he attacked from, and the battlefield is right in front of you.
This is the battlefield right here.
Across the river.
Why are you so sure?
Well, if you go through the Greek historians, they mention there's a headland from the main range of the hills. And this is the only place where we have the headland, and we're standing right on top of that one. And on the far side, according to the historian, there was a ravine where he had his cavalry and other forces during the day and the night, and crossed it across to the island, which still exists. And this, as a matter of fact, out of this whole range of hills, this is the only place where he could have crossed.
Wonderful, wonderful.
The general offered to show us how Alexander did it.
They're bringing punt poles over there, aren't they? Yeah. There's another belt.
Alexander's plan was to hold Porus in front of him and then to cross higher upstream, a flanking move repeated through history, down to the Napoleonic Wars and Desert Storm.
Now, that is a classic movement of encircling or outflanking move, where you have either both flanks or the center lean across the enemy's major force and attract their attention. And show as if they were going to cross, or keep them amused in general terms, and go around and on a flanking movement and hit him either on the flank or at the back. Well, Napoleon tried it again and again. Austerlitz is one of the most classical examples.
We took a small force of cavalry in the boats. Our infantry crossed on bales of straw, just as the Greeks did. According to the historian Arian, Alexander also had some prefabricated boats. Alexander went in a 30-oared boat, so they've got quite a number of them. Yeah, they could probably take a lot of troops. But the cavalry, he says, came across on rafts that they'd made and prepared beforehand, stuffed with...
They must be with planks on top, stuffed with straw, local brush and things.
No.
We make them in a different manner, only to take the infantry across, not the horses.
What, you still use them in the army
we do,
in
yes,
our time?
Yes, we do. During World War II, Irrawaddy and Burma campaign, most of the troops always crossed on these rafts.
Amazing.
The general decided I was so woefully ignorant of military matters, I should get first-hand experience of what Alexander's men went through.
With this kind of stuff.
This has been going on on the Burma front during World War II.
Yeah.
Most of the crossings were done on this thing at night.
Yeah.
Alexander had done it before, of course, but remember, this time it was at night, pitch dark, pouring rain and rising floodwaters.
Up to you. No? Is that far enough?
Alexander used tents made of sewn animal skins, which were watertight. We had an old tarpaulin, and just before we reached the deep channel,
Should have gone first, the middle one and the two others climbed simultaneously on both sides. Otherwise you will tilt it and get water abroad.
the battle took place near the little village of Sikandarpur. Surrounded and surprised, Porus had little chance against one of the hardest armies which has ever existed. It was a horrible scene, the rain, the churned up rice paddies, the Macedonians jabbing their long spears into the elephants' eyes. The elephants were maddened by their suffering, says Arian, trampling friend and foe alike. Porus's army was wiped out and he surrendered. But Alexander was so impressed by his bravery that he gave him his kingdom back, and Porus became his ally. The march restarted around midsummer, right in the middle of the monsoon rains. It must have been the last straw for the Greek troops, the wet, the muggy heat, the mosquitoes. As any old India hand will tell you, during the rains nothing ever gets dry, your gear and weapons rust, clothes rot, wounds don't heal. And there was no end to the fighting. Casualties mounted remorselessly. We followed Alexander by road and entered today's India north of the Sikh holy city of Amritsar. Nearby we picked up 2 taxis to take us on to Alexander's appointment with destiny by the banks of the river Bias. In early September, Alexander reached the Bias, at the crossing place of one of the ancient routes through North India. As he stared out across the river, Alexander still thought the end of the earth was near. His teacher Aristotle had taught him India was a short peninsula jutting into the great ocean which circled the earth. As far as he knew, they didn't have far to go. But here at the Bias, when Alexander questioned local people about the road ahead, new and unexpected information came into his hands. The end of the earth was not near. 2 or 3 weeks' march from the Bias was a far bigger river, the Ganges. and a great kingdom with a vast army and thousands of war elephants.
How far is it? How many kilometers is it from here to Delhi? 500.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Long distance.
Yeah. The Greek army could do about 30 kilometers a day, so well, they could do that in 3 weeks, couldn't they?
It opens in October.
Looking out across the river, Alexander, of course, was all for pushing on. But now, after 8 years and 17,000 miles, the troops had reached breaking point. The king urged them to one last great effort, but he was greeted with silence.
No one dared speak. They were too frightened. And then one of the senior commanders, Coenus, plucked up the courage. "Sir, you said you would never lead us as a dictator," he began, rather daringly. "You always said you were open to persuasion. Well, let me speak now, not on our behalf, but on behalf of the ordinary rank and file of the army. Most of the men who came out with us from Greece have left their bones out there on the roads of Asia. And those that remain are battered in body and weary in spirit. Just look at them, their gear's ruined, they're wearing patched up Indian clothes. They've had enough. Sir, under your leadership, our achievements have been simply wonderful. But the will of the gods can't forever be taken for granted. Surely the time has come now to set a limit to our endeavors."
The king had reached the moment on which his life would turn. It's been a subject of legend ever since. It's even in the Hindi movies. The king was beside himself with fury. For 3 days he sulked in his tent. Then, seeing the army's mood, Alexander asked the gods for a sign. The army waited on tenterhooks. The omens were bad. Alexander accepted the will of the gods and agreed to turn back. And what if they'd gone on? To the Ganges, China even. The whole of history might have been different. But it was not to be. Before he turned back, he made altars to the gods who'd brought him so far. Dionysus, Apollo, Hercules. And an inscription. Alexander stopped here. Back on the Jhelum River, he'd ordered a fleet to be built, ready to journey down the Indus to the ocean. 1,000 vessels all told. They included Greek galleys. The last of the old master boat builders on the Indus chuckled at the idea. These Greek warships, he said, would never cope with the Indus. He sketched a few modifications to Alexander's naval plans. Flat bottoms, he said. That's what's needed.
So, if they were going to build a fleet like this, in 6 months they had to build a fleet like this, they would need a very big workforce.
It's not possible.
Not possible, but Alexander did it. He set sail mid-November.